Hello everyone. Welcome to our sixth session. As you know, in the previous sessions we have discussed so many different issues, and I really hope that you have watched the previous videos. If you haven't, please watch those videos because all of them are interconnected. So you have to watch all of those videos before you can continue watching this current video. Now, so far in our series, we have talked about the meaning of myth, how it is different from legends, and how we can interpret myths, psychologically speaking, or from different perspectives. We have also talked about the correlation between myth and Greek religion, of course. Then we talked about the stories about the creation of the universe in general and how certain creatures, including like Gaia and Uranus, created the next generation of gods and goddesses called the Titans of the universe. And then through the mingling of the six male Titans and the six female Titans, the gods of Olympus came into existence, and then there was this war between the Olympian gods as well as the Titans and the Titans, which resulted, of course, in the imprisonment of the Titans in the core of the earth, and then the ascent of the Olympian gods who dominated the world of Greek mythology. We then started talking about the god of gods, Zeus, and how he became the god of gods and how he dethroned the Titans and assumed the title of the god of the universe and, of course, the god of the gods. Then, of course, we started talking about different gods and goddesses. And today, of course, we will be talking about two goddesses. One of them is the goddess of war and wisdom, Athena, who was the favorite child of Zeus. And of course, we will talk about the goddess of love, Aphrodite, and of course, her male counterpart in mythology called Eros. So let's just get down to business and start our analysis. As you can see, well, we will start with Athena first. Athena is the Olympian goddess of wisdom and war, as you can see here, and he was also the patron of the city of Athens. So he was she was the protector of the city of Athens, of course. She was the virgin deity, but although she was the god of war, like paradoxically speaking, she was also associated with peace. So there's this paradox in the character of Athena. She was also the goddess and the patron, of course, of handicrafts, especially weaving. And weaving becomes such an integral part of Greek mythology because don't forget that in the story of in the Trojan War story, when Odysseus goes to Trojan War, and then on his way back gets lost and is wandering the seas for almost 20 years. One of the things which allows his wife Penelope to sort of prevent her suitors from asking her hand for marriage is again weaving. So Athena, who's the goddess of weaving, has a strong presence in Greek mythology, not only like for herself, but also for her followers and those who believe in her. So Athena is such a great goddess in Greek mythology, and all of the heroes of Greek mythology, all of the heroines, asked for her guidance and for her help. And because she was such a central figure in, of course, Greek mythology. The birth of Athena. Let's just go back a little bit and talk about the birth of Athena. Now, the birth of Athena is somehow there is no single version when it comes to the story of her birth, and so different writers have provided different versions of her birth story. In the anonymous Homeric hymns, we have one story, and then later certain other writers and poets offer a different version of her birth. But what's common about them is that she was the favorite child of Zeus. Let's read this part, which is taken from Homeric hymns. And then we will talk about the alternative versions of the story of her birth. And this is what the anonymous writer of this hymn writes about the birth of Athena. I begin to sing about Pallas Athena, renowned goddess, with bright eyes, quick mind, and inflexible heart, chaste and mighty virgin, protectress of the city Tritogeneia. Why Zeus himself gave birth to her from his holy head. So this is one version of her birth, that she was actually, she came into existence, and she was born right from the holy head of Zeus himself, and she was arrayed in her armor of war, all gleaming in gold, and every one of the immortals was gripped with awe as they watched. So when she came into existence, she was fully clad in her armor, right? That's the image that we have of the birth of Athena in this Homeric hymns. You can continue reading it, but that's basically the gist of the story when it comes to the birth of Athena, uh, as represented in this Homeric hymn. But there's also another one, which is the Hesiod story of Athena's birth. As I'm sure you know, we have been using Hesiod's theogony as one of our primary sources for this course. And so, once again, we ask Hesiod to tell us how Athena was born. So, this is an alternative story. Although there are similarities, we wanted to focus on the difference between the birth of Athena in terms of as expressed in the Homeric hymn, and of course the birth of Athena according to Hesiod. This is what Hesiod tells us about Athena. Zeus, king of gods, first took as his wife Metis. So in this story, Zeus assumes a wife, takes a wife called Metis. But because there's this prophecy about Metis giving birth to a kind of kid who would be like more powerful than Zeus himself, which is the same thing that happened with Achilles in the previous video, if you've watched it. So the same thing happens here. There's this prophecy going on. There's this paranoia attached to Zeus, who always believes that a new son, a new person, a new baby is going to be born who will be more powerful than Zeus and will ultimately dethrone him. So there's this paranoia going on, in the character of Zeus. And the same thing happens here because once again, we have this wife called Metis. And then there's this prophecy saying that Metis's child is going to be more powerful than Zeus himself and is ultimately going to destroy Zeus. And so let's continue reading what Hesiod has to tell us. Who was very wise indeed among both gods and mortals, but she was about to give birth to the bright-eyed goddess Athena. Then Zeus treacherously deceived her with wheedling words and swallowed her down into his belly at the wise instigations of Gaia and the starry Uranus. These two gave Zeus this advice so that no other of the eternal gods might rule supreme as king in his place. So that's the prophecy, that if he allowed Metis to give birth to this, bright-eyed goddess called Athena, then of course Athena would ultimately destroy Zeus, and that's why Zeus eats Metis. And so from Metis was destined to bear, for Metis was destined to bear exceptional children. First, the keen-eyed maiden Athena, Tritogeneia, the equal of her father in might and good counsel. And then she was to give birth to a son of indomitable spirit who would become the king of both gods and mortals. And that's why Zeus kind of is terrified of the idea of allowing Metis to give birth to a new kid. And that's why he swallows Metis. So he swallows Metis, but then later on, same thing happens, that he cannot stop Athena from coming into this world. And so she ultimately steps out and comes into this world. And so these are the two stories that we have in the Homeric hymns and of course in Hesiod's book about how Zeus was born. And so basically the only difference between them is that in the first story in the Homeric hymns, like there is no mother involved, and Athena is independently born out of the head of Zeus himself. But then in the second part, the same thing happens again. Athena is born, out of the head of Zeus, but this time after Zeus has already devoured or swallowed Athena's mom, Metis. So that's the difference between these two stories. Okay, there are also other stories about the birth of Athena, but these variations add something to the stories that we have already discussed. So, for example, in these variations, sometimes the birth of Athena was facilitated by Hephaestus, who split Zeus's head so that Athena could come out of the head easily. Okay, so there's this axe involved. Sometimes the duty and the responsibility of splitting Zeus's head is given to Prometheus or even Hermes. So all of these stories kind of tell the same thing, but there are only some details which are, of course, different. Okay, so this myth, the idea that Athena comes out of the head of Zeus, actually establishes the fact that there was a close relationship between them. And so the very fact that Athena came out of the head of Zeus also, allegorizes some of the basic characteristics of this goddess, the fact that she's extremely powerful because she came from Zeus himself, the fact that she's the goddess of wisdom because, well, think about it, he came out of the head of Zeus, who's the god of gods. And of course, the fact that, especially in the version in which there is no mom present, we know why she's a very powerful virgin. And the fact that she's like more masculine than feminine, okay? And she's not like this feminine creature at all. And her masculine features are more apparent than her feminine ones, of course. And of course, she's a virgin. There are so many different temples for the worship of Athena, but we want to talk about the sculpture which is present in the Parthenon in Athens. Now, the Parthenon was the great temple of Athena, and it was Parthenon comes from Parthenos, which means, of course, virgin, and was one of the epithets, one of those descriptive phrases that we always associate with an important figure. Like for example, when we say Cyrus the Great is an epithet which is always associated with Cyrus the Persian king. And so we have this Parthenon, which is a temple for the worship of Athena Parthenos in Acropolis in Athens. And so you can see a picture here, and then the sculpture itself is like this. Of course, like most of it is destroyed, and so it was kind of rebuilt at some point in history. But this is one of the sculptures which was present in Athens for the worship of Athena. Now, Athena, as I said, like previously, is also the patroness and the goddess of household arts, especially spinning and weaving. And you can see this beautiful painting here, which kind of symbolizes the fact that Athena was the symbol of, was the goddess of weaving and the goddess of all household arts, including all of the spinning and, of course, weaving. So just keep in mind again the story of Odysseus and Penelope, which I talked about. That's also a very good indication of how supportive of household arts this mighty goddess was. Now let's talk about the character and the appearance of Athena in, of course, Greek mythology. A study of women, cloth, and society in these early times presents us some insights into how women's textile industries and arts were always associated with Athena, and how they actually became a metaphor in Greek mythology, which kind of illustrated the importance of Athena as the the goddess of womanly skills, especially the skill of weaving. Not only is Athena a symbol for all of this womanly skill, she's also the goddess of being a cunning person. And so these two sides of the story, the idea of being cunning and the idea of being, a great weaver, show themselves, as I said in the story of Penelope, who was Odysseus's wife, and she used the same technique, the idea of her cunningness, of her cleverness, to ward off all of those suitors who were attacking this city because Odysseus had been absent for almost 2 decades and they thought that he's probably dead. And then Penelope, the queen, needs to take a new husband. But she uses this idea of being a cunning person and then this idea of weaving to kind of come up with a solution to prevent all of those suitors from attacking the palace. And so when Odysseus finally returns, of course, he's enraged that all of these suitors have been harassing his wife. But that's the part I want you to focus on. That Penelope uses all of these qualities associated with Athena, uh, so that she can remain faithful and loyal, of course, to her husband. Athena is also the goddess of, different kinds of arts and crafts and skills, as you can see here, including like military skills, political skills, and of course domestic skills as well. And generally speaking, all of this fall on the under the umbrella of being the goddess of wisdom, because all of these skills have something to do with being a wise person who can do so many different things at the same time. And so being the goddess of wisdom shows itself in all of these kinds of arts and crafts and skills that Athena is a symbol of. She's, of course, also skilled in the taming of horses, and of course, she's very much interested in ships. And that's why, for example, a lot of people and sailors who kind of got lost on the sea prayed to Athena for any sign to actually send them on the right path. So that's the part of the story which we will talk about later on when we are talking about the Greek sagas, including the Iliad and the, of course, Odyssey. Uh, in when it comes to the representations of Athena in other arts, like for example in pottery, in painting, etc., Athena is often portrayed with warlike qualities because she's the goddess of war, of course. So whenever you see Athena, there's a helmet present, the spear is also present, as well as her shield, the aegis, on which the head of Medusa is, of course, visible. And sometimes she's accompanied by other, for example, winged creatures and figures, like, for example, Nike and Victory. And this is how Athena is usually represented in other arts. Now, we said that Athena is the goddess of war, but let's not forget that she is also extremely beautiful. But she's kind of aloof, and she doesn't really want to have anything to do with love because she herself is more interested in her masculine part, which, of course, she believes is more striking. Let's talk about some of her other epithets. So one of the epithets was the virgin, which we talked about. And the other epithet for her is green-eyed, the green-eyed Athena, which of course relates to the radiance of her eyes. Other adjectives which are used to describe Athena include owl-eyed, because in our culture and in so many other cultures around the world, owls are symbols for wisdom. And well, naturally, she's also associated with this bird, owl, and that's why one of the symbols always present in representations of Athena can be the bird owl. At some point in history, she was also associated with the snakes. especially certain snakes who are coiling at her feet. And this kind of association suggests that perhaps Athena originally was a fertility goddess, which of course later on, of course, changes, and the virgin part of her character dominates the later traditions of mythology. Uh, Her character, of course, her virginity and her character in general is represented as completely impeccable. Unlike other virgin goddesses, like for example Artemis, uh, to whom men uh, dare or venture advances, Athena remains sexually unapproachable. So no man uh, ever dares approach Athena. And so that's probably because, as we said, her masculine features are quite dominant. And of course, Hephaestus kind of attempts, there's an attempt on the part of Hephaestus on her honor, but of course, she keeps her purity and, of course, and integrity. We will talk about this story in when we are talking about Hephaestus later on in the course. But I just want you to know that, throughout her life, Athena remains a virgin, and of course, she remains a very powerful masculine figure. And so throughout history, of course, she remains like this very powerful creature to whom men dare not, approach for any kind of sexual favor. And then, of course, she's the favorite child of Zeus, who loves her very, very much. And generally speaking, she becomes the symbol of a powerful woman who can help people who need help, especially in war, and of course she can also help women who need help, and that's basically what happens in the story of course Athena, and uh, and we talked about everything which is important about Athena. This is the end of this part of the video. Initially, I wanted to talk about Athena and Aphrodite and Eros in the same video, but then I decided against it because Aphrodite and Eros are about something completely different. And because I don't want this video to be too long and boring, I'm going to stop this video right here. But please continue watching the series in the next video, which will be entirely dedicated to the stories surrounding Aphrodite and Eros. And that video will probably be longer because I'm going to talk about some of the interesting stories that happened to Aphrodite, especially her relationship with Adonis. I will also talk about the story between Cupid and Psyche, Eros and Psyche. So I will talk about all of these stories in the next video, which will be entirely dedicated to the goddess of love and, of course, her male counterpart, Eros. Okay, so don't watch to forget the next video. But for now, this is the end of the video, and thank you very much for watching.